January 3, 2026. This was the day news broke that the United States had arrested Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, shaking the entire world. But here's a question. Why did it end up like this? To understand that, we first need to look at what kind of country Venezuela used to be. Today, we're going to talk about how one country ended up facing one of the worst economic crises in the world, starting from the very beginning. Venezuela. These days, most people think of it as a country with a completely broken economy. But believe it or not, this country was once incredibly wealthy, thanks to its massive natural resources. So where did things start to go wrong for Venezuela? Surprisingly, Venezuela's economic collapse didn't begin that long ago. Let's rewind the clock back to 1922. That year, Venezuela discovered oil on a massive scale. Just the officially confirmed reserves amounted to about 303 billion barrels. That was more than many major oil-producing countries in the Middle East. From that point on, Venezuela jumped headfirst into the oil market and rapidly expanded its economy. And the results were shocking. In the 1950s, while much of the world was still busy recovering from World War II, Venezuela ranked fourth in the world in GDP per capita. It was truly a golden age. Then in the 1970s, another major opportunity came along: the oil shock. In simple terms, the oil shock was when oil supplies suddenly dropped, prices skyrocketed, and the impact spread across the global economy. Venezuela, already a major oil producer, made enormous profits during this period. In fact, oil prices jumped from around $3 per barrel in 1973 to $11 per barrel by early 1974, more than tripling. At that point, Venezuela was as wealthy as today's oil-rich Middle Eastern countries. But ironically, this is where Venezuela's downfall began. Suddenly flush with cash, the government began pouring out subsidies and rolling out welfare programs that were almost free. Money was spent like water. At least at first, nothing seemed wrong. Oil prices kept rising, and selling the same amount of oil brought in several times more revenue. Thanks to oil money, Venezuela became incredibly rich. But problems started piling up along the way. As the entire country focused on oil alone, Venezuela's economy became completely dependent on oil. Oil became the absolute center of the national economy. And then another problem emerged. Because the state directly owned most of the oil industry, those in power began to grow increasingly corrupt. Instead of investing oil revenue into the country's future, they focused on enriching themselves. As a result, the wealth gap widened rapidly, and severe polarization took hold. Then in the mid-1980s, global oil supply began to exceed demand, pushing prices down. You could even argue this was oil prices returning to normal. The problem was, the Venezuelan government had no plan for this scenario at all. The entire economy had become vulnerable to a single commodity, and the outcome was predictable. As oil prices fell, Venezuela's economy began to collapse rapidly. When the government was forced to slash welfare spending, the already massive wealth gap grew even worse. Public support drifted further away from the government. And right at this moment, one of the most important figures in Venezuelan history appeared: Hugo Chavez. In the mid-1980s, as the economy was in free fall, a coup attempt took place in Venezuela. At the center of it was Hugo Chavez, a former military officer with socialist leanings. The coup itself failed, but ironically, it put Chavez in the national spotlight. He gradually began winning public support. As a result, in 1999, Hugo Chavez became president and pushed forward aggressive socialist policies. At first, Chavez's policies seemed to work. Unlike the old elite who monopolized wealth, Chavez dramatically expanded welfare programs for ordinary people. The government directly controlled prices, allowing people to buy goods for less than what sellers wanted to charge. Free healthcare and housing were provided to the poor. Basic infrastructure like roads and public facilities was also built up aggressively. At the same time, oil prices started rising again, making Venezuela's economy appear to recover quickly on the surface. This helped Chavez lock in strong public support. He then removed presidential term limits through constitutional reform, paving the way for long-term rule. And in fact, he won re-election 4 times. On the surface, Venezuela began to look like a comfortable welfare state. But hidden inside that system were some fatal flaws. Normally, countries fund welfare through taxes collected from citizens. But Venezuela was different. Because its economy depended almost entirely on oil, welfare was funded not by taxes, but by oil revenue. And the problems didn't stop there. As the government aggressively controlled markets, companies struggled to make profits even if they produced and sold goods. Eventually, many businesses shut down production altogether. Factories closed, and farms were abandoned. Unemployment rose, and poverty spread even faster. Ironically, the worse things got, the more the government had to spend oil money on welfare. That left little room for investing in technology or developing new industries. This vicious cycle made Venezuela's economy increasingly unstable. In reality, countries like Venezuela, with extremely narrow industrial bases, need deep structural economic reform. Simply put, they needed both industrial diversification and institutional reform. That's exactly why oil-rich Saudi Arabia began diversifying early on. It makes sense in that context. Venezuela's type of oil also made things worse. Crude oil generally comes in two types. Light crude can be exported with minimal refining, while heavy crude requires complex refining. Most of Venezuela's oil is heavy crude. That means advanced refining technology is essential. But Venezuela never developed that technology on its own. Instead, it relied on foreign oil companies. Then in the late 2000s, Chavez began forcing foreign oil companies out or nationalizing them, claiming it would increase state revenue. That decision led to disastrous consequences. Without the technical expertise to modernize aging facilities, Venezuela struggled to export oil at all. So despite holding some of the largest oil reserves in the world, Venezuela found itself unable to sell oil. Then in 2013, Hugo Chavez passed away from cancer. He was succeeded by Nicolas Maduro, who remains at the center of global controversy today. Maduro largely tried to continue Chavez's policies unchanged. To make matters worse, global oil prices began falling again. At the same time, relations with the United States, Venezuela's largest oil customer, rapidly deteriorated. Conflicts erupted after U.S. companies were pushed out during nationalization. Then in the 2010s, as the U.S. shale revolution took off, the anti-American Maduro government increased oil exports aggressively to counter U.S. shale producers. The problem was that Maduro continued costly welfare policies to maintain public support, but state finances were already drained. In the end, Maduro saw only one option: printing money. That choice only made things worse. As money flooded the economy, the Venezuelan currency collapsed in value. Inflation spiraled out of control. In 2018, the IMF released Venezuela's inflation figures: 65,374%. Even seeing the number again is hard to believe. Put simply, something that once cost $1 now costs $650. At that point, money stopped functioning as money. People began pricing goods by weight instead of face value, or relying on bartering to survive. Banknotes littered the streets like fallen leaves. Some even made crafts out of currency and sold them. The chaos wasn't limited to the economy. In the 2018 election, Maduro's re-election was accused of being fraudulent. Opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself interim president. The U.S., the U.K., and several other countries refused to recognize Maduro and backed Guaido instead. As a result, Venezuela faced the unprecedented situation of having two presidents at the same time. This instability lasted until 2022. Both the economy and political system were thrown into turmoil. In the end, no regime change occurred. Juan Guaido's interim presidency officially ended in late 2022. Maduro remained in power. Meanwhile, after inflation crossed 65,000%, Maduro's government attempted currency reform. 1 million bolivars were replaced with one new bolivar. But it had little effect. People's lives didn't improve. Severe food shortages caused average body weight to drop by over 11 kilograms. The phrase Maduro diet even emerged. In 2018, it was revealed that Venezuela offered to pay for medicine using diamonds and precious stones. With even basic infrastructure failing, public safety deteriorated as well. Recently, inflation numbers have come down significantly, but it's still hard to say that Venezuela's economy has fundamentally recovered. The Maduro regime has remained politically and economically opposed to the U.S., effectively shutting American oil companies out of Venezuela's resources. From the U.S. perspective, Venezuela is a country with massive oil reserves that remains isolated from global finance and energy markets. In the end, this isn't just about one person. It's the result of tangled resources, finance, and economic structure. So the real question is, can Venezuela change that structure and reclaim its former economic status? That's it for today's One Bite Economy.